Black spirit. It is imperative that we hold close to our cultural stories and take pride in the ways we pass down oral knowledge. It in a colonized world, there is a common misconception that written history is superior to oral retelling. This perspective alienates those of African descent because our traditions favor memory and communal continuation of stories as ancestral preservation. African wisdom is not lesser due to the lack of written documentation. I'll argue that it's what increases its richness and sentimentality for the cultural stewards. It makes the retelling sweet to the ears when it comes from the mouth of the griot, transforming the speaker's heart into the process. My father's racing mind would seem to slow down when he would recount the moment of his mother. I saw how his eyes would focus, slightly somber as he would remember her face, like she was standing before him, an apparition of love. Gently, memories of time spent at her farm would flood his mind. My father would reminisce on the way she would bathe him with fresh herbs, and soon enough, he was seemingly transported decades back. Him, as a teenager, picking out ripe vegetables with his mother. I'm sorry, ripe vegetables while his mother was at the market. He could smell the soil and feel the foliage at his fingertips. My father was at home here. His mind and body stored family recollections that survived long after my grandmother's death. He would reach back to her through the gardens he planted out in our backyards, an ancestral talent he now inherited to commune with her across plains. Ancestral remembrance can be the intentional embodiment of family's hobbies, like how farming was for my father. It's through these hobbies we welcomed a physical sensation of oneness with our ancestral lineage, and also a chance at newfound abundance that would have been otherwise untapped. Prosperity arrives when we simply incorporate the creative activities of generations past. In order for us to truly reclaim our practices, we must focus on the feeling. Our ancestors and their stories are not something that can be tangibly felt, but intuitively experienced through a bridge of spirit. Focusing on the feeling was how my mother, at the brink of death, returned to her body in a dream. It was an Ibadan, where my teenage mother was struggling with a fever that seemed to loom over her without relief. She wore white cloth and cowries covered in herbal medicine, where these were all prescribed to keep her spirit going. One day, my mother fainted suddenly. Beads of sweat accumulated on her forehead as she was unresponsive, and she awoke in the spiritual world. She examined her surroundings and noticed a house nearby that was surrounded by fresh vegetables and grass. An elderly couple exited the house and looked at her with a bewildered expression. They locked glances. My mother, who was already uncertain by this interaction, patiently waited for the woman to speak. The elder the elderly woman eyed her attentively and firmly said, "You're too young to be here." The woman sighed, shifted her gaze to the man next to her, who held an amused expression. "This is my husband," she declared to my mother. "Return back to your father and tell him my name." Urgently, the couple instructed her to run in the other direction, citing that she was not of age to venture towards the death that sickness was trying to bring her in the dreamscape. Excuse me. She woke up from her fevered dream, startled, surrounded by her parents and concerned siblings that relayed in vivid detail what she saw in her sleep. My grandfather would confirm her account, stating that the elderly couple were his own parents who passed away when he was a teenager, long before my mother's own birth. There was a silent hum that filled the room. Empty space was replaced with contentment. A mutual consciousness came through the household. It was Spirit that saved her life. Spirit would have also saved. Nope. Sorry. Nope. Just made that up. Spirit would also save my mother's hope that seemed to dwindle upon immigrating to the United States with her husband and children. Being raised in a more communal environment, the isolation that the new country provided my mother was increasing was incredibly staggering. The selfish, individualistic mindset ingrained into society created a vacancy within my mother's heart. Life became cold and destitute. She lost the warmth in her eyes, and her smile became a hymn for yearning. At this moment, she was without her traditional prescriptions that would help her survive this deep rooted homesickness that was now affecting her health. But she had her voice, she had her memories, and with her children as witnesses, she called down to the ancestors every night through her stories. I remember how her voice would bloom, ricocheting off the banisters, while ghosts walked through the halls to meet us, all cradled up at the edge of her bed on a school night. We were hypnotized by the way our mother would create portals for spirit to travel in, with no tools other than the spoken word. She chanted and beckoned her eyes of the Creator with only her tongue on those nights. The recalling of the water spirits seemed to incite shadows of mermaid tails and river tides on her room ceiling. I watched how she would take a throaty exhale at the end of it, her shoulders gently collapsing after carrying her ancestors on her back. A look of satisfaction would appear on her face while the ghosts retreated into the walls. The air around us would settle. She breathed. She healed herself in this way. My mother alchemized her solace without physical tools and with just the energy of remembrance when she told us stories of her lineage. As a major, sorry, I'll start. My mother alchemizing her solace without physical tools and with just the energy of remembrance when she told us stories of her lineage is a major example of how spirit lives, how spirit is passed down in discrete ways, areas of resistance, all living things within the body. It is the feeling that frees us. It is the remembering that keeps us from slipping into hollowness, even without physical tools. It is the remembering that comes from a particular kind of African traditional medicine, oral retelling, and body memory shake hands, fortifying spiritual aptitude, spirit, excuse me, fortifying the spiritual aptitude of its owner, preserving it from the virus of forgetfulness. It is the lack of acknowledgement of the spirit that becomes a disease. It invades the human body with forgetfulness, swallowing up the naturalistic environment as a result. The imperialistic minded created a deprivation of spirit by housing stolen spiritual art in institutions. They showed their ignorance of seeing these works as alive and sentient. Just like how our spirit embodies a human form to take part in earthly pleasures, divinities create a home and resting place, earthside, through these physical vessels. Could you imagine yourself behind a glass? To be visually consumed by an audience who is oblivious to your stories, who is unable to recite the hymns of your legacy that were cherished by your community? Imagine a half life being gazed upon by those unacquainted with the knowledge of your full spiritual capabilities, ignorant to how your presence would uplift those deeply devoted to your sacredness. What a hallowing existence that would be. A popular argument for the continued displacement of spiritual items is usually summarized to how else would the public see these works, but perhaps we don't need to see them. I ponder what there is to truly delight in witnessing spiritual tools out of form, tools still and static, unable to sincerely express their full potential through traditional rites, especially when it's no longer connected to the feeling but to the capitalistic exhibitional voyeurism, consumership. Let's try that again. Consumership has become another way for the art industrial system to participate in spiritual kidnapping and sheltering these divinities. Many of these spiritual vessels are created with wood, earthenware, and other natural materials. They innately respond to Earth's life cycle. Somehow, of these artworks, excuse me, some of these artworks are not meant to live forever, but to return to the earth and therefore be recreated, like all living things that have a finite time limit. Museums usually conserve their indigenous spiritual works by pushing them into living beyond their time that periods that would be unusual otherwise. The West's archival desire can at times enter a domain of unnecessary immortality, especially regarding spiritual art. These divinities are alive. Excuse me. These divinities are alive, and they are equally aware of the spiritual war that threatens them and the people they govern. Similar to the foreign rehoming of African ancestral art, was the physical displacement of at least 15 million Africans through the Mafa, also known as the transatlantic slave trade. Though we have some documentation, we will never come to fully understand the true horror of enslavement. It was a tragedy that impacted displaced Africans and threatened to break their bodies and spirit, leading to inherent trauma that has impacted their descendants for generations. Though we experienced the revolution of spirit that was reborn through various disparate practices like hoodoo, Haitian voodoo, obey, the liberation results of such treachery does not forgive the means. I've encountered various individuals within the diaspora who justifiably experience frustration, grief, and even anger about the idea of reaching back to divinities or ancestral lineages that seemingly allowed such horror to occur. Though others have theories, I have not found an answer for the insidious offenses that have impacted the diaspora. Perhaps wickedness doesn't have clear reasoning to it. Perhaps wickedness is too a spirit born from disembodied malevolence. The brutal enslavement of the African diaspora, combined with the genocide of indigenous Americans and, and imperialism over other cultural groups, was the beginning of a spiritual war, a excuse me, warfare that attempted to disconnect, isolate, and swallow people away from the divine. Yet spirit persists to find the diaspora on these new lands through different forms, with an assignment for them to stay alive. With these newfound allies in trees, waters, crossroads, and the skies, they force their liberation through blood and spiritual commandment. They revolutionize their escape. We must live using these tools to our advantage to force our freedom and shield us from these spiritual evils as the diaspora did. Nice. It's the lack of regard for the sentient excuse me. Now I am winded. It is the lack of regard for the sentient nature within ritual art and human bodies that underscores the troubling mindset that is prevalent within the Western world. The complete denial of spirit,